Ethereum governance enforcement happening. Right?
Yeah.
And it was legit because it was supported by the majority, it was proposed by the DAOs, and it was confirmed by the miners.
The off-chain governance.
So,
yeah.
But the point which I wanted to point out was like what is really DGov, right? For me, it's really the distributed governance aspect that we are all responsible, and we need to figure out how we can collaborate in a distributed manner.
Why do you think we are all responsible for that?
Because you have a choice. You know, this is pretty easy. Like, if you have a choice, you need to be responsible for what you do.
That's almost passive aggressive, though.
It is. The point is, if you don't take responsibility for your actions, who should take responsibility for your actions? If you don't take responsibility, you have no voice. This is my opinion about participatory governance. And everybody can decide to not have an opinion and not participate, but then they need to live with the results. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm pretty radical on that one.
So you're not worried about things like voter apathy?
No, the point is because you know, like the consequence out of that is that there were other people which were lazy, right?
So if you are opposed to Brexit and you didn't vote against it, then it's your fault and you have to deal with the consequences.
Yes, exactly.
But the question is, how do we get people to vote?
Yeah, the incentives are always going to be...
Don't think about voting in the first place. Think about political participation, because the voting schemas we have today are just super oversimplified mechanisms which say, you know, which give you a set of like options to vote for. In the worst case scenario, it's yes, no vote, like Brexit. But it does not give you the option to explore other potential solutions. And when I speak about participatory governance, I mean like the full process of signaling a problem, to proposing a solution, and then making a decision and execution of it. And I think the biggest problem with that is that we think about governance as a very binary voting schema, which we feel is like the ultimate achievement of society right now.
Ooh, okay, so a question. That was Cambridge Analytica case in Trinidad, actually. And the Cambridge Analytica supported the campaign for some people. They actually targeted a group of people and had a campaign of not to go vote. So what do you think about the responsibility of all those people that don't go vote because they were influenced to not go vote?
Yeah, I think that's a super important question, because we can't have a democracy or participatory governance which works if we do not reclaim the communication channels. So we have
reclaim communication channels.
Yes, we have.
So that we have. Okay.
We have monopolies which control the communication channels, and we can't take back control over the political process if we don't take back control over the communication channels.
Yeah.
So and we are lost in that also with Twitter right now in the crypto space, because they decide what gets reached and what not.
Right. Yeah, you made that point.
Once you have control of a communication channels, don't you get like censorship as well?
Yeah, sure.
The risk.
Yeah.
It's a risk.
This is what's happening.
It is.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that now I'm doing this making off, so if Lane, if you could. My point is, in Britain, for example, you had a lot of people protesting right after Brexit, going to the streets and asking for another referendum, asking for that one to be, and that voice of billions of people in the center of London wasn't heard. So we can blame Cambridge Analytica for influencing people not to vote, but as soon as they saw the result, they wanted to change.
Yes.
And that's the thing. Like, they ignored that protest. So
Who's they? What do you mean by they?
But the government said no. That's it. That's set in stone.
But you can't. The government is not monolithic, right? So in the case of Brexit, actually, part of the government wanted another. Like, one of the parties wanted another vote, and one of the parties didn't want another vote, right? So,
I agree.
It's complicated.
And also with Brexit, I find it very unfair. It's used as an example for how it's not done, but in reality, I think that we took all the responsibility on the shoulders on all those people which made a vote, but they had no chance of really getting used to their power. So we saw all the mistakes happening. We saw the mistakes in the media and the polarization, which was certainly one problem because of the unique media landscape in the UK. And in addition to that, people were not used to that responsibility. And I find it very hard to tell a child, you know, like, oh, you made your first step and you failed. You know, you should never make a step again. It's like this is not how participatory governance works. It's like getting up, making those steps, and getting used to that responsibility.
Right.
We can't blame people, you know, without a culture of training it, to really get used to it or make good decisions just with the first step they take.
If we're talking about training right now and addressing only the negative consequences of, let's say, Cambridge Analytica, why can't we say that we can become better and we can train to use the same tactics but to achieve better results? So for example, when we are talking about how we are tackling the climate change, we could as well just use the same tactics. We could we could. I mean, they could. The politicians use that tool for having the voters voting for them.
But it's still that there is an organization which has that power, and in this case it's like analytic companies in combination with something like Facebook as a communication infrastructure.
Exactly.
And we do not control that infrastructure. So to say that we can play the same game is not true. It's like we can't push an agenda which we see fit for distributing power in the society.
Oh well, I'm not talking about distributing power. I'm actually talking just about having centralized power, using the power in a better way. So using the same tactic, using the same measures, using Cambridge Analytica, but to achieve something that is socially acceptable.
You're basically saying why is Facebook and Google evil? Like, can they not be evil? That's sort of what you're asking.
They cannot. I mean, they could as well just use the same technology they have to conduct and to make our lives much better.
Because absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't think it's possible.
And there is
in a centralized
That
system.
is such a negative approach.
I mean,
but that's the reality of every lesson of human history.
Yeah, I agree. And there's another thing with this approach is like, what are the incentives for like Google and Facebook and so on, right? They have like business models which are in a direct sense focused on exploiting privacy to make profits.
Did you want to get out here? This is
the
the East Side Gallery.
Guys, it was a pleasure. Thanks for the extra mile making off. Everybody, this time from Web3 Summit in Berlin. I'm here with a very interesting, brilliant group that aims to not solve, but at least bring a lot to the discussions of governance in blockchain, which is a very deep, a very philosophical, a discussion that has to deal with society. So I'm going to pass the microphone to each one of you to please introduce yourself. What motivates you to be discussing how blockchain can be improved by governance, and what are the main flaws that you see today? Max?
Thank you. I'm Max Semenchuk. It's a bit different from what we started with. The history is pretty clumsy. How I got in there, it was like set of events that weren't planned. But now, I heard talk one of the guy about like self-organization, and he said there's only the main question. There's only one main question, and all the other questions go out of that. And the question is something around who are we and what we're trying to achieve. So what we're discussing here is more practical aspect of how as we now are feeling more really a planet, a humanity. How we collaborate on that amount of scale. That's what interests me.
Hi everyone, my name is Phoebe Tickell. I'm part of the DGov core team, which is Max, Tim, and Anja and I are all part of running together. Can you repeat the question, the prompt question?
First of all, what motivates you to be today at DGov and dealing with decentralization and governance as a topic? And then what frustrates you the most in the blockchain space today regarding?
Great questions. Okay, so what brings me into working on distributed governance? In my core, I believe that decentralizing power and actually distributing decision-making and empowering diverse groups of people to coordinate in taking action together, to take decisions together, results in better decisions and better actions for the collective and for the planet. I believe that it's for such a long time we've behaved and acted in hierarchies that actually we have forgotten. It's a muscle that we haven't flexed. We haven't kind of built those practices and built those ways of behaving, and we're very ignorant when it comes to how do we behave in a way that actually benefits the collective, or how do we behave in ways that allow us to collaborate at a larger scale. Even in groups of like 4 or 5, you know, you'll have like small groups who like struggle to collaborate or struggle to kind of resolve tensions or conflicts. And from a kind of justice lens, you know, if we look at like groups where we groups that start to behave without hierarchies, often the kind of patterns that come out is like the same sorts of people end up taking power in the group. So, you know, for example, we live in a patriarchal society, so often in a diverse group, men will be kind of speaking more loudly and having a kind of larger influence on the decision making. So if we actually want to distribute that power to kind of maximize diversity and therefore maximize the kind of complexity of the decisions that we're capable of making, we're going to have to actually intentionally use different practices to share that power, if that makes sense. Cool. And the things that frustrate me the most about the blockchain space, right? It's the very technological, it's the lens that what I've noticed is when we're having these discussions in kind of blockchain spaces, there's an invisible lens, which is one that is mechanistic, reductionist, and solutionist. So it's always about fixing problems. Even earlier today, we were talking about fixing climate change as if it's like an engineering problem that can just be fixed. And I believe actually like we need to, like we talk about embodying complexity, and actually the way to embody complexity is also the way we approach problems. Like the way we've been approaching problems for the last centuries is exactly how we got into this mess, and we need to start using different ways of seeing the world, different ways of behaving, different ways of understanding to create those solutions.
Very well said. Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you, Phoebe. I think that's a very important perspective. The initial motivation which drove me into the distributed governance space, or which also put me into the spot to really push it forward with the strong wish to bring it to way more people, was that we don't have a good way of managing the commons today. So open source projects which give value to everybody are still often organized in very like clear structures. And if we want to provide a web for everybody, if we want to provide a base layer for a digital society which can collaborate worldwide, then we need to find a way that this infrastructure is not owned by a monopoly. And this was one of the core motivations when we look at Web3, that we wanted to get the power back to people and wanted to make it a fair space again for engagement. So we need to answer the question, how do we govern the commons? And it's no coincidence that this question is the same for a blockchain as it is for other shared resources like the earth. So I think that this is one of the most important areas where we need to proceed on, because we have the exponential technology. Some people say we have the power of gods, but we are still ignorant. We don't know how to use that, and we need to become wiser and more informed in our way how we make decisions. So the cognitive diversity is super important, that we have all the different angles and that we can combine this into a wise solution or into wise decision making. I don't want to speak about solution. I think that's important. So yes, I'm excited to be here. And my greatest frustration is in the blockchain space indeed the try to reinvent everything and believing that we are in a bubble which is non-existent. We are living in a world which is interconnected, and we need to understand that we can't get out of that world, which means that we need to find solutions for real world problems, and we need to also work with what is there. And we are part of a legacy. We are not the first generation of open source, and we will not be the last one. And we need to start to connect to that legacy.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I'm Lane Rettig. I'm based in New York City, blockchain core developer. So the lens through which, so I'm guilty of being one of the engineers you mentioned and having maybe a mechanistic driven kind of view of the world. I was drawn into the Ethereum community almost 2 years ago, initially brought by the technology. That's what sort of excited me first. A little bit of both. Did they find me or did I find them? I was in a time and a place in my life where I was like receptive to new ideas, and I think it was good timing because, you know, this was 2017, so we'll just kind of leave it at that. Like things were beginning to get a little crazy. Right, so I was initially attracted to Ethereum primarily because of the kind of engineering side. But I guess, so to segue into your first question, what brought me into governance or got me thinking more and more about governance was that as I kind of went deeper into the space, I began to realize that while the technology of platforms like Ethereum, I think, is in pretty good shape and is moving in the right direction, making progress, I don't think the same is true of kind of the human or social side of the project. And I'll just keep going. This segues directly into the second piece of your question. I really think that both Phoebe and Tim hit the nail on the head with their answers. To Phoebe's point, I think the majority of stakeholders and contributors, the amazing people who have conceived of and designed and built blockchains, including Bitcoin and Ethereum for the past 10 years or so, are primarily they're technical geniuses. And they're very mechanistic in their thinking. They're very good at things like game theory and mechanism design, but I don't know that they understand the social complexity. And I think that we're at an inflection point now in blockchain in general, and especially in platforms like Ethereum that have seen some adoption and some value accrue, where if we can't begin to solve some of the human and social challenges, then the platform will just fail to deliver on expectations and potential fail to scale socially, that kind of thing. I guess that's all. Sorry, and then. Yeah, so part of it is what Phoebe talked about when she said that people are just kind of a bit narrow-minded, and again, like just too much focus on the technical and mechanistic side of things without enough thought about the human side. So that's kind of what we're all working on here. But I think Tim also had a point when he said that there's a lot that we can learn and gain from engaging in the real world, right? With experts and people, like generally these are not new problems. These are broadly speaking problems that humans have been facing for hundreds or even thousands of years. So that's my other frustration, is I call it blank slatism, the desire to like we're clearly very frustrated about the world, and Bitcoin and Ethereum are kind of intended to be these subversive projects in a way, and they kind of want to sweep away all the existing systems, but actually like we need to learn a lot from the world. I wanted to add one more super quick thought in response, because you had said something about how do we use governance or DGov to make blockchain better. That's step one, right? That's what we call governance of the blockchain. But I think we'd all agree here that this is about a lot more than blockchains, right? So it's governance by blockchain, right? So how do we then, once we figure out how to govern these blockchains, how do we then use them to build a better world for all humans? And that's not just about blockchains.
I just want to give a little bit of context before handing over to Anja. I'm super sorry for taking this time. Why we started this interview, some people joined this room and are now sitting behind the camera. So for those which will view later this video, and I would really welcome to have also during the conversation using the opportunity to swap in, because we have like really exciting people also on a non-blockchain space here which worked on those problems. So Stacco and Ela Kagel and everybody else who's sitting here, if you feel like engaging, I think we should really use that opportunity.
Let me show to the audience around a little bit where we are filming so they don't get very curious, but we got some new joiners. We got some new joiners around, people were making noise and dismantling the conference, so I would just like to show that interesting conversations, there's always room for one more. I'm going to try to get everybody here, at least at some point, participate in our talk. So, coming back now, this time to Anja. I'm going to pass the ball to you, Anja. And let me know what frustrates you the most and what was your biggest motivation to join.
Got it. So yeah, my name is Anja Blaj. I'm also part of the DGov core team. We've met through Twitter, I think. I mean, you meet a lot of people through Twitter here in this space. And I have all open discussions about what frustrates us the most. My frustration was pretty much the international law and how the law is not really being effective in the real world. So when I started working on my thesis about global law, about international law, how the decay of international law is kind of happening and how we don't really have the mechanisms to fix it, I became very interested in the governance of Ethereum because there was a lot of parallels. How the governance is happening here, how it is being established, how people are discussing topics, how they're implementing amendments into the code. That's pretty much the politics that you see in the real life when you're elaborating about politics, about climate change, about everything like that. So there was a lot of parallels. What frustrates me is that I think technology is just not going to fix behavior problems or what we think. So even though we have these, even though we are eager to change the world the technology is simply not going to do anything about that. So it's always going to be our mindsets, and this is part of my frustration that we're simply not doing enough on the part of how we are changing the mindsets, but are just focusing way too much on the technological parts or simply the law parts. So a year ago, I think there were discussion about how the code can be the new law or the law is the code, etc. And that's pretty much it. So it's still a frustration. It's not going to become the law. The code simply cannot just fix all our behavior problem and the political discussions that we're having. And if we're not going to change something about that, if we're not going to really focus and deeply think about how we are governing ourselves, where those things are coming from, we're not really going to change anything. But the motivation is that we are having DGov. We are bringing a lot of people together from various areas, and it's always been an interdisciplinary discussion that we are having. It's always been technicians, lawyers, sociologists, psychologists, people from different backgrounds. And what we are really trying to do is find bridges and create new languages. So we know that we don't really understand each other yet, but we are on a really good path. So.
Can I ask an important question? What is DGov? For context, who wants to take that?
And also, yeah, I mean, can I invite you, Stacco, to also be part of that round? Just to give a little bit of context. I mean, no, you give it yourself.
Avoiding my question. No, please.
Not gonna take up the DGov question. Sorry to disappoint. Quite happy to be here. Like, if the first question is like, why are you here? I'll give the honest answer, which is to see my mates. And that's why I go to events. And I think that we tend to overlook that. But even in the quantized like sense of like, what is the added value? Even if you want to look at it that way, it's like the best conversations that happen when you go for coffee, when you go outside. This is what creates the conditions for us to relate to each other and do really good work, rather than the, oh, you know, what were the outcomes of the conference, etc. So I'm Stacco. I've worked for the P2P Foundation for many years. Now I'm part of this organization called Commons Transition. We're doing this DISCO project that I spoke about before. I'm a commons advocate, and to me the commons are endemic to governance, and there's lots of learnings over there. The commons, we don't see them as focused on resources, and if you've read Elina Rostrom, this is her focus, but on social processes, and I think that is an important distinction. Things that I don't enjoy, I mean, I very much agreed with, shockingly, with what everyone has said, both on the positive and negative. Over here is I think you've alluded to this, like the sense of inevitability of like DAOs being successful or DAOs being necessarily a good thing. When you take a look at the investments that are being made on DAOs, you can postulate that some of the interest behind those investments will get to dictate the directions of these organizations. The other thing that really bugs me is the sense of, it's a question of privilege and in these spaces, and I see various scenarios. People who are blind to their privilege, people who get really reactionary when their privilege is called out, and then people who like say all the right words and acknowledge it, but they're not doing the difficult actions. And to me, the difficult action is like, get the other people, the people who are not here, to be part of the conversation, and more importantly, part of the design. And you've alluded to this, and like, we have many things to learn. There's this saying that was most recently popularized in South Africa, like disability activism, which is nothing about us without us. So don't make the great DAO for the disenfranchised of the world, make them part of the design process. And like the Zapatista says, learn by listening. So that's what bugs me, and maybe pointing out to a possible solution.
And we're back, live from Berlin. So this is the setup we got right now. I think one of the most interesting things is that a lot of people do not have the conditions, let me see if I'm on camera, but the conditions to come to a city like Berlin and have the privilege to afford a hotel, inexpensive conference tickets, to participate in this level of discussions. I try to bring YouTube because I think it reaches the masses. A lot of the discussions in crypto happen through Twitter, Telegram, and I think one of the persons that has suffered the most via this, what is this community? Because everybody's brave out of a keyboard that nobody can see your face. You can get a pseudonym and say whatever you wish. So to start this discussion about governance, I think, Lane, you're the person that I think struggled a lot in Ethereum to save the core of blockchain. Can you tell me about your worst nights? Did you lose any nights of sleep through that? And how did you think those discussions on Twitter helped you to change your mind about community?
I mean, wow, there's just so much in that question to unpack. I wouldn't use the word suffer so much. I mean, there have definitely been sleepless nights almost regardless of Twitter, just because I care so much and I love Ethereum so much, I love the community so much, I love the project so much, and of course I want to see it achieve its potential and become everything it has the potential to become. And so, like in some, maybe this is not the right metaphor, but in some way I feel like a father watching a child and like off in the world, like making mistakes and like doing stupid things, and just kind of like on the one hand feeling like, oh goodness, like I want to intervene, but on the other hand, like knowing better, but on the other hand, knowing that like the community needs to like stumble through these things and like make these mistakes and learn through the process of making mistakes. So I think there's the Ethereum governance piece here. I think also there's just this question of kind of crypto Twitter and sort of social media more generally. No, social media is not helping. Social media is a bit of a dumpster fire, and crypto, like Twitter in general is basically, as you said, sort of a bunch of dogs, like people who are like anonymous or pseudonymous, I should say, like shouting at each other through megaphones, rather than like a civilized group of humans sitting down and having like an engaged discourse, right? Which is like, that's what we're having here, and that's what we have at events like this. God, there's also like the privilege piece you mentioned as well, like the fact that we're privileged enough to be here in person and be having this conversation. There's like a bunch of open topics here. I think, yeah, social media is not helping, but it's like kind of the best thing we've got for now, and like we all like to hate on it, but we all use it anyway. So I guess my one brief thought here is like use it, but use it mindfully. So like mindfulness has been like a very important part of this journey for me, and like more than suffering or struggling, I would say it's just been a really fantastic learning opportunity, learning about the right mindful use of social media, learning about the community and about where we're doing well and not doing well in things like governance and education. But most importantly, just learning like mindfulness in general, and understanding that like not taking things too seriously. That's where I've landed, right? Like crypto Twitter is not to be taken seriously. Crypto Twitter is, like I said, it's like a shouting match. It's a lot of fun. So if you go into it with that frame of mind, like I'm going to throw some tomatoes, I'm going to get some egg on my face. It's a brawl. It's like fun. That's great. Occasionally there's like gems of wisdom, or like you said, like actually this group, you guys met and originally connected through Twitter. So like clearly like good connections can form. That's happened to me as well. But it's like not to be thought of as like a governance forum. It's not.
I would like to add something to Twitter, because we shouldn't forget that social media is one place where a lot of communication is happening, where we often do not realize that this is a manipulated communication channel. Right. So if I post something on Twitter, if my friends even see it, is depending on the likelihood if they engage with me beforehand, and if there's a relevance of them engaging with me, if they see it or not. So this means like Twitter is not an independent channel, it's a manipulated channel which gives reach to certain agendas and which reduces reach to certain like topics. So this means we as a community, we speak about governance, we should organize and open source independent infrastructures to allow us to communicate in a way that we can trust that our messages are received. And furthermore, there was a question about what is DGov. I think the main thing what we need to do, and what you said, is like getting back to the interpersonal relationship, to deep thinking, to deep conversations, to deep relationships. And that's something which can happen in your city. You don't need to wait for your government to sort out your governance issues. Meet with other people and take responsibility, because we are all responsible for sorting out the new governance mechanisms. And this is true for Ethereum, but this is true for the cities and all the other places as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking for people watching in Brazil and other countries, far off from this conference in Berlin, like what we're doing is actually at its core a very basic, within DGov, it's a very basic and simple thing, and it's can sound very complicated and complex, but actually at its core there are these basic practices which groups of people have been using for many years around the world, and essentially it's based upon the relationships that form between small groups of people who can build enough trust and then combine those small groups into larger projects. So, if you're watching, you can also start a DGov chapter in your local place. You can get in touch with us. We're DGov.Foundation. We can support you in letting you know the kind of projects and things that we're doing, the platforms we have where you can engage online. But at its core, it's all about meeting with people who also have aligned interests in wanting to do something positive, social impact, environmental impact, and using these practices, facilitation techniques, documentation, so taking notes at your meetings and sharing them, transparency, practices for transparency, practices for collective decision making, practices for collective budgeting. These are all things that you can do as well. It's not a glorified blockchain based. It doesn't need to be blockchain based. You can also do it. And I really recommend that you feel empowered to get involved.
I really like that Phoebe brought up the topic of trust. I just wanted to highlight that. I think that that's central to all of this, to what we're doing. Blockchain, in the words of Nick Szabo, and I agree with this, is a tool for scaling trust, sort of social scalability. So is governance, I think. So governance is the collective set of all kind of practices, and the practice of and kind of the philosophy of doing this, of kind of as a group of humans coming together and sharing resources and scaling our trust. Blockchain is a new tool to do that, but it's just a tool. It's just a new tool in a continuation of tools that we've had over time for things like social scalability and trust. And I think to me that's what ties the on-chain world to the off-chain world. That we should be using these new tools to, as you said, govern many things, and it's not just about blockchains.
The logic which comes into the technology on the base layer of blockchain is still something which needs to come from somewhere else. So the decision-making functions or the structures we create, a lot of them have been created before, like you said, Phoebe. And I think we can think about them as libraries we can plug into DAOs to give some guidance and tools for governance, but it does not replace the fundamental questions. Why are we collaborating? For what do we collaborate? What do we live for? Why do we do that? We are using blockchain as an anchor for combating asymmetries in power. So this was one very big impact it had, also to provide a way to provide money as an infrastructure. And now we are getting there, that we have a space where we can innovate on governance. So I think this is what the technology gives us. It gives us leverage, it gives us power. But for what this power is used, this is not predetermined. It's very open.
So my next question will now be to Anja, Max, and Saka. And I would like to know, I see when I started initially, there were so many coins and so many tokens. And even though we talk about monopolies, if you open CoinMarketCap today, we have so many different projects. Most of them, when you think about just about storage, about one solution, how to do decentralized storage, I think we all can think about at least 3-4 names.
I'm sure there's more.
Maybe. There's probably way more than that. But for each solution, we have a different project, and then it's a different group of developers and all that. What do you think about that? Is this good for the environment? Is this bad? Do we make us better developers?
I think that we're in this extended sandbox and no one's admitting to it. If you compare the number of daily users of Facebook, which is daily users would be that's the total number of users, but daily users would be 1.2 billion, and the daily users of the top ranked DApp I think was in 1,000. That's 1,000. I'm really crap at math, but I think that without visualizing it in number, you can see that we're just playing around. So I think that it's, not to use the Silicon Valley maxim of play fast and break things. These are toys. No one is really engaging with this. So we will see if it coalesces and how it coalesces back then. So yeah, it is good to have this. Also take something into account. Redundancy is good in systems. I think that there's this desperation. It's oh no, why do we have so many different projects? It's we're just playing around. This really isn't orders of magnitude, scaled up. So let's just have different things, let them fail and see what comes up.
Yeah, the whole existence of such so many projects is another frustration for me that I tried to overcome with DGov. So first I started to research the crypto field. It was again like in 2017, which was a huge boom. It like daily you get like maybe 10 new projects announcements, right? So you just couldn't follow, and it's not like getting easier with time. So while I really support that new projects are emerging, like I just want to bring attention to the cognitive difficulty to understand the field from one person. Maybe that's why we built this networking community to kind of research and understand what's happening in a group and rely on each other's opinions.
Thank you, Anja. More currencies is good, bad? What's your view?
The more the merrier. Yeah, back to trust. I think that with the ICOs and with a lot of scams that we saw in this field, the trust was gone. A lot of people even now have issues trusting all the developers and people that are mentioning blockchain, even though there is an underlying value with this technology. But yeah, absolutely. There was even an issue calling it trustless technology. So to me, it never was that we just lost the trust and we don't need the trust. We just, instead of having signatures, instead of seeing you in person, instead of having those demands, we are just trusting our technology to supplement that. So there's still trust. It's just that the code can actually reflect what we have done in person. And it has done that so well that we are now having the financial markets on it. Now we're creating the identities. Now we're creating organizations, and it's moving. But the trust is still going to be built on a personal level. This is why we need these types of events. This is why we need the conferences. This is why we need to elaborate in person and have meetings each month or on a weekly basis, and get to know each other, because we all bring something from our history. We all have issues, and if we are trusting each other, then we are open to speak about them and get better. And this is how we can get better together as a community as well. So building on top of trust and having the technology that supports a lot of trust issues or manages them in a new way, that can only be better for us. Regarding the number of currencies, it's good to have experiments. I mean, there were even some ideas of having different, I don't know, incentives, for example, for a city. So each city could have its own token. Every community could have its own token. Every organization could have its own token. All these experiments are good, but at the end, because they're all based on the technology, blockchain technology or distributed ledger technologies, if you want to go further, I think that because of that, it's possible now to connect them, to link them all together, and to create better complex systems that we weren't really able to create with just the traditional systems that we have. So having all the stocks, having all the stock markets, having all the states and their own currency wasn't enough. We still need the technology and bridges between them. So creating that possibility, it's not really that we are going into the global currency, having only one, but multitude of them interconnected.
I mean, that's not new, right? Like like every community having their own currency. Like if you rewind in history, that's the way it used to be, right? And just to pick on my own country, like the United States, if you go back, even not to the very beginning, like 100, maybe 150 years ago, there were like a huge multitude of currencies, and it's like a relatively modern phenomenon that we figured out how to have like a bunch of people share a common currency, and there's like a very specific reason for that. Like it just doesn't work very well because of this economic problem called the coincidence of wants. A single money solves that. So I don't see that ever kind of working. But obviously there's fun, exciting, interesting things, experiments that can be run around that's incentivization and incentivizing a community to have ownership in a project or an initiative or something that should continue.
I love the fact that you mentioned trust, that human beings trust who they know each other in person. And it also takes time to build it. It takes sometimes seconds to destroy it. Reputation, it comes over time. But
I didn't want to disrupt you, but yeah, that's one of the things that is happening right now with DAOs. We are building on reputation as well. So we already have Web2. We already have a lot of social media that builds on reputation. So for example, LinkedIn offers you connections and offers you endorsements, etc. And every time you build on reputation, every time people know how the reputation is being built, there's a chance that it gets abused. And this is pretty much happening everywhere. As soon as you are building a system, at the moment you build it, there's even a Latin saying for that. I'm sorry for bringing the Latin, but absolutum obsoletum. It means that as soon as a system is built, it's obsolete already. So you will always have to have the change, and it's the only constant that we actually have. But reputation plays a huge, important task here right now with ours.
My next question will be to all of you. So my next question will be to all of you. We're building DAOs, those decentralized autonomous organizations. For a lot of people that do not know exactly what a DAO is this idea that we can decentralize governance. In each person describes a DAO in a different way or foresees. How could each one of you describe, if you could think of a perfect DAO, and even if it's utopian, but what would be the necessary ingredients to build a solid, evolving, because of course I see a DAO as an evolving organization, but what would be the main ingredients to build a DAO? I start with you again, Anja.
The perfect DAO or the main ingredients for the So a DAO stands for distributed autonomous organizations. Decentralized.
They're kind of interchangeable. They're not. People use
Oh no. Okay, yeah. So to
Maybe we
me,
start with the difference between decentralization
true,
and
yeah.
distribution.
To me, they have different meanings, so it's better to say decentralized autonomous organizations. And there's a lot of talks about what decentralized actually means and what are we actually decentralizing. So there are still some tasks, there are still some relationships that we are building and are going to be centralized. Decision making is, we try to make it as decentralized as possible, but sooner or later we figure out that something is still being centralized in a way. When it comes to automatization or autonomous, I think there's different levels of how autonomous you can be. I would compare that to autonomous vehicles. So you have 5 different levels. 0 is that you still need the human power. 5 would be that it's completely autonomous and you don't even need a human behind. And there is no 5 level, right? So hopefully there will never be.
That's Skynet.
Skynet, yeah, absolutely, Skynet scenario. And then you have organizations. And to me as a lawyer, that's just ridiculous that we are trying to find out one single DAO or one single organization that would fit them all. So even in real life, you have different types of organizations. You have LLCs, you have cooperatives, you have numerous. Stock market is full of different organizations, and it is because we are governing ourselves in different styles. We do have different needs. We do have different cooperation and relations that we want to address or interests that we want to protect. So because of that, we established a lot of different organizations and legal entities. It's going to happen the same way with DAOs. So it's not that we are trying to find one single definition of a DAO. It's better to have numerous ones and then just fit something that we need into a specific DAO structure.
I echo Anja's sentiments broadly. I think, like, to me, a DAO represents the next sort of evolution in ways for human beings to collaborate, come together, collaborate on like an initiative or a venture or something like that. It could be a for-profit thing, could be a non-profit thing, but just a way for human beings to collectively organize and like, among other things, solve collective action problems, reduce transaction costs, right, which is the kind of Coase argument for like why firms exist. So I really actually view it as kind of the next evolution of something like a firm. But there's also, it can be kind of structured to be more like a nonprofit, right? So it's not like a perfect perfect comparison. And just like Anja said, like, it's like saying what's the perfect firm or the perfect organization or the perfect nonprofit structure. Like, they are as multifaceted and as various as the various as we are and as our communities are, right? So like, there's no such thing as a perfect DAO. Like, it's very much has to be in response to a particular circumstance, a particular set of people, particular set of problems, resources, etc. I have a question though. Like the autonomous part is the part that is the most interesting and the most kind of nuanced for me. And autonomy literally means self-law or self-rule. I'm just wondering, I mean, and maybe this is open for everyone. I'm just picking on you as a lawyer. Like, what does it mean? And is it actually possible? Because like humans create these things in the first place. Like, is there such a thing as like real autonomy in the case of like a DAO or a smart contract? We don't have to answer now. We can come back to it.
I think it would all go with machine learning, right? We only build intelligence after thousands of points of data. And then slowly we start to teach robots how to walk, and then the machines how to respond. And then the more data, the more information, the better they can respond accordingly to the pattern that they learned. I think that's what makes Facebook $500 billion company, Google $800 billion company. We're talking about companies that are worth more than probably 5-6 countries together. So I think to build autonomy, we need a lot of data. To build machine learning first, it's the kind of things that we teach the machines. But back to the decentralized autonomous organizations, Max, with you now, what do you think are the ingredients to make a DAO? How do you see a DAO in your view?
Yeah, so there are lots of different concepts around how organizations will evolve, and DAO is like one relying on blockchains and stuff. But I think we all do that. Like one of the main efficiency factor is intelligence, specifically collective intelligence. So whatever produces the best collective intelligence would be the organizations of the future. And how do we enable that? First of all, we need transparency in order for people to have the information, right? We want the system to be just and not corrupt for people to want to participate. They're like the most important thing they can contribute is like their intelligence to that. They need to have trust in others, so they would know they won't be left off. So this opens up all these layers that we might want to replace with technology to make it auto-executable. So like in DAOs, like if there is some decision made, the funds are just sent and nobody waits for some manager to click a button or think about it. So I think we'll develop our knowledge about how it will work and what makes the best ingredient in the future years. But I think that's the main metric we want to measure is, are we making decisions better? Are we understanding the world better?
So the question is how to make a great DAO, perfect DAO. Yeah, I guess for me it's interesting because I think about all the things we can do without DAOs that DAOs do, and I try and really boil it down to like what is it that actually a DAO can do that like a group, a collective using online tools that are not blockchain based can also do. So some of the things that I think are exciting are the kind of automated feature of the smart contracts. So previously you could make a decision in a big group of we want to allocate, $200 to this or whatever, $5 million to this, but then that decision would still need to be kind of ratified and executed by a human with a bank account. So it is still centralized, whereas now, like in a DAO, you can actually have that decision, the way that decisions are made kind of coded into software and that being connected directly to releasing funds in like programmable money being cryptocurrency. And so that's interesting. And the other interesting part is kind of being able to fork these communities so we can kind of program governance in a way that we could also program into Web2. So within the community network I'm part of called Inspiral. But the exciting thing with DAOs is like with the click of a button, you can basically fork that community and suddenly have like a cell dividing, like suddenly have an exact copy with the same DNA but different people and be able to actualize that in a different way. That's also pretty interesting. It's also really exciting for those of us who have worked in co-ops for already many years or these kind of collectives, like to be able to build transnational co-ops, the kind of cross-border financial barriers of like transferring money and all of the complications and costs that brings about. Like DAOs allow for this like very fluid, transnational, being able to transfer value across borders without huge costs and bureaucracy. So those to me are like the three exciting parts of DAOs. You wanna jump in?
So when you mentioned what would the perfect DAO be, I had like huge dystopian visions and thought of Aldous Huxley and like normative like Brave New Worlds. Also, you know, some people have talked about the perfectly synchronized world computer, which I also find terrifying. One person's notion of perfection will not make a lot of other people happy, so I would stray away from that. DAOs themselves, I mean, we've written like a criticism, and this is not just semantic nitpicking, but our alternative is the distributed cooperative organization. So addressing the difference between decentralized and distributed, I'll refer back to the famous, you've seen this diagram by Paul Baran, 1964, where you have centralized, decentralized, distributed. To us, when we talk about distributed, we're always talking about power, about distribution of power. When you talk about decentralized, what we see, in fact, very much is what we can call polycentricity, lots of different centers. In a decentralized system, you're not really analyzing how much power any given node has. So when you look at who's mining Bitcoin and who's able to mine Bitcoin, you have a really stark illustration of how decentralized systems can accrue. And of course, we have the 51% problem, etc. And why cooperative? Again, it's autonomous. Well, first of all, it puts you in touch with a 175-year-old tradition who've already been experimenting with this. And furthermore, to me, autonomous kind of like stinks of the supposedly profit-maximizing individuals that we're supposed to be. And this is what you see like in the blockchain space. And again, like, don't want to like hammer on the Bitcoin example, but it's basically distributed capitalism. It's like we can accumulate if we have certain privileges, and you have like lots of accumulation in like different places, but you're not really mutualizing. So again, the cooperative kind of like forces you to have the difficult conversations. Autonomous is code law. Before we make something law, we have to make it legitimate. And what usually precedes law is what we would call vernacular law, which is customs, which is conversations that then get codified, be it by a state, by a legal system, etc. And I think that this necessary step of cooperation really needs to like hold that dreamed about autonomy, which terrifies me in check.
Just final thoughts. I was just thinking about what is my final thought, and I had this come to mind, that my worst nightmare is that climate change and all of the associated very frightening and looming problems continue outside, and we're stuck in a room debating which blockchain we should base our global governance on.
My final thought is currently, as we're experienced in it, right? We're working this on every days, and we can easily tell you don't need to trust. We have like stable processes, but I think for the people from the side, it's can be unclear and scary, and like what the hell's going on overall? Like, how do you deal without managers, for example? That's whole of the life it was built like that. And just a suggestion how to improve the situation is try any initiatives that's built in such a way to just experience it. It shouldn't be like full-time or something, but from the inside you would kind of feel how it works, and then you can be ambassador for that in the other communities, for example.
I think that we live in unique times. I think everybody could say that when we go back to the last 1,000 years, but we are living in a times where existential risks have a huge potential to eradicate the majority of life on this planet. And this is caused by humans. And we are living in a time where we need to go through a phase shift. We need to be able to do something we have never done before. And this is very difficult because we have so many fronts to tackle. If it's AI, if it's climate change, if it's like pollution, if it's war and tension, if it's extremism. And we really need to focus on what we can do, not what are the things we can't do, but what are the things we can do, and how can we do them. So how do we embody more complexity? How do we start to collaborate on a new scale? How do we bring in all the things which can help, which increase the likelihoods of success? And I think as a closing remark, this is I think the shared story we can tell, that we need to find new ways of collaboration and find new ways how we scale them. And it's not about blockchain, it's really about a new way how we collaborate and coordinate. And this is, I think, the core of it, and I think we need to remember each other about it and be, while we do that, be passionate and live the best life we can live, go the path we really feel makes us happy and surrounds us with people which bring light in our lives. And with that, while also trying to solve the problems which really matter, I think we are also increasing the success rate or the likelihood of success. So that's my takeaway.
Hopefully we're reducing the likelihood that we destroy ourselves and destroy the planet. I hope. If not, then what are we doing? I'm gonna steal what Phoebe did because it's a good idea. So my closing thought is going to be my greatest fear as well. I think that's a great. Why not end with fear, right? So my greatest fear is that we build these new structures, these powerful systems, in an attempt to make things better, and we end up recreating all the existing mistakes and power structures, existing entrenched power structures from the off-chain world on-chain, and then we're suddenly like stuck with that. Like that's terrifying to me, but that is kind of the direction I see us going. I think that we're at a bit of an inflection point. Like it's still absolutely like early enough to kind of change course, but I also feel like we're kind of like pushing against this immovable object, which is like all the people and all the momentum and everything that's gotten us to where we are, with a very narrow focus on things like technology. And again, as we discussed earlier, like not enough thought or attention or care paid to like the human side of things. But I think collectively, if we all kind of push on this massive object together, like we might be able to nudge it just enough so that, you know, it's like if you nudge the meteor out of the way 2 years earlier, then maybe it'll brush by the Earth and it won't destroy us, right? So like we have this window of opportunity to do it, but it's like kind of closing. There's I believe a Bloomberg journalist named Matt Levine who writes a lot about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and Ethereum and stuff, and he's got a saying which is that he's watching the blockchain world make all the mistakes of the off-chain world in fast forward. And I think that's true in like financial sense. We're rebuilding a lot of the same financial infrastructure and, you know, building derivatives and all this kind of stuff. But my hope again is that we're able to end up in a new place and in a better place. So I guess just leave the question of like, how do we do that collectively? And as I said, we can't do this on our own. So we need to kind of just eschew all this like fundamentalism, this maximalism, this, you know, focus on a particular chain or a particular project or something, because we can only achieve these things together at this stage and worry about competing later.
I love that you touched upon the meteorite and went into space already. So we are investing heavily into space industry as well, right? And people are constantly asking, why are we doing so if we have so many troubles on our planet? And the reason is that we need to know both worlds. We need to know what's out there so that we understand our planet, and we need to understand our planet so that we know what's out there. It's called a hermeneutical circle. And I love those discussions. We need to know how the bigger picture looks like so that we know how to address the smaller ones, and vice versa. And same goes for blockchain. If we want to understand how the virtual world actually looks like and how it functions, because we are creating a new world, we are creating a new jurisdiction in a way. It's becoming completely independent, and it's going to compete with the nation states. It's going to compete with whatever systems we are having right now on Earth. If we want to understand them better, we need to understand ourselves better and the existing systems. And if we want to understand and help our existing system, including the politics, including the climate change, if we really want to solve them, then we need to combine the understanding from the virtual world, from even the space industry, if you want to say it. But yeah, I do believe that it's a cooperation of all the things that we know, and also all the people that came to the final remarks. I mean, if you really spend all the time to listen to us till the very end, you might as well just join us.
Seriously, you're one of us.
Exactly, you are one of us. True.
Get a close-up of all of our tired faces.
There is actually one last thing. We spoke, I'm going to pass in front of the video to everybody here. I'm the worst editing person. But the last question, if the person at home, sitting at home right now, you could guide them, not just to a good book or a thought or a quote, but to 3 links, each one of you giving them 3 links that could probably allow them to change their minds, or how or where do they start to change the world? It can be a GitHub repository, it can be a Twitter person that they follow, it can be a good book, anything that might inspire people to go there and click over here to start your journey. So, yes.
Because I've unfortunately got to shoot off. So 3 links to start your journey into this world of stuff. 3 resources, or maybe books. Gosh.
I'll inspire you. All right, I've got 3. Number 1, Bitcoin white paper. Number 2. Yeah. Number 2, the book Sovereign Individual. It's a dangerous book. Read it. Number 3, I don't know, Ethereum.org or DGov Foundation.
I have one to understand the old world. It's called Power, 42 Laws of Power. Then I would highly recommend 2 podcasts, which really blow my mind, which is one Future Thinkers podcast from Yuvi and Mike. It definitely gives you all the background and the context why we are motivated to do what we do. And the other things is Neurohacker Collective and Daniel Schmachtenberger. Existential Risks is one of the podcasts. I highly recommend reading that. And so these are my 3.
Yeah, I immediately thought about the Maurik by Ricardo Semler, which is like relevant to the context as well. Another one which is kind of good as well is Reinventing Organizations. And we also have this nice wiki on our website, which collects links to lots of other stuff.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I recommend definitely DGov Foundation. Sign up to our newsletter, join our Telegram group. We can chat there. I am from an organization called Inspiral, ENSPIRAL. So inspiral.com is interesting for an example of a community that has been organizing this way for the last 8 to 10 years. And we just published a book called Better Work Together, which is a good book and a great book actually that puts a lot of these new ways of working, new ways of being into practice. Is called Going Horizontal, and the website is goinghorizontal.co, and that's actually where Tim and I met and got into DGov together.
Sweet. So to delve deeper into the commons, I would recommend, there's an upcoming book going to be published on September 3rd called Free, Fair and Alive, The Insurgent Power of the Commons by our colleagues David Bollier and Silke Helfrich. So you can go to freefairandalive.org and you can get some previews and more links. Deeper dive into the commons, another project that we did that was focused on inclusivity and having something like chewable and tangible and not so theoretical. It's a website called primer.commonstransition.org. So this is the Commons Transition Primer. For the work on discos, go to Hackanoon and search Stacco, and there's an article, and eventually. Oh, Stacco, not Sacco, of Sacco and Vanchetti fame. Stacco is STACCO. So search on Hackanoon, there's a brief article, and this autumn we'll have disco.coop up with all the resources that you need.
One more to go.
Last but not least.
I'm going to focus on legal. So if there's any lawyers, probably good to start with the international law, which is Brownlee, Shaw, Kissinger, Koskenimi definitely, and then just go from that to legal hackers and to DAO legal, because there's a lot of links that just show you how decentralized already the legal field is and what's happening here. So there's a lot of lawyers that are creating new technological solutions. There's a lot of us, even Koala, for example, join Koalas, that's definitely a good way to go. We're finding solutions for governance and talking about how the international legal solutions might actually help the blockchain space. That's pretty much it. And also the DGov, definitely, because we are talking about all these links and are providing all the resources.